Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is your two sharp needles, Gavin Rice and Jack Stanley. And on this episode, we're going to talk a little bit about Bell and Tainter, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard from Rene Rondeau or a couple other people, the Bell and Tainter graphophone. We're going to kind of elaborate on who they were, Alexander Graham Bell and Charles Sumner Tainter, and talk about their contributions to the early phonograph production. What do you think, Jack?
I think that's a great idea. Okay. I wasn't
Wonderful.
sure.
So, yeah, that's okay. I actually just wrote a paper about these two and their feud with Thomas Edison. I wouldn't call it a feud, but I would call it a kind of uh, uh, a battle per se of little stabs of improvements and, slaps in the faces. For example, if you guys are not familiar with how the term graphophone came about, I just want you to take the word phonograph and swap the first and the third syllable, and you get graphophone. So Charles Sumner Tainter and Alexander Graham Bell did that because they needed to think of a company name, and this kind of offset Thomas Edison, but I don't think it upset him enough to do anything about it. And it was,
I mean,
yeah, right. And of course, oh, sorry, Jack, go ahead.
no, well, just to throw in while you're getting to that whole area, we have to think of Edison. Edison looked at the phonograph almost like a proud father with his daughter. And so he just protected that machine. I remember just going through notes, and there was a song, By the Sea, by the Sea, by the Beautiful Sea. And he said, disgusting. That does not go on my phonographs. Okay. It's almost like his daughter. My daughter is not going out with him. Okay. That kind of thing. That's basically how Edison kind of looked at this. And he looked at anybody else fiddling with the phonograph as interloper. And he certainly looked at Bell and Tainter's.
Yeah, he had his eye on Bell and Tainter for a long time, even after the 1890s into the turn of the century, when Charles Sumner Tainter and Alexander Graham Bell decided to, just to mention, Alexander Graham Bell died in 1922, and Edison and Charles Sumner Tainter lived past that. So, as we get later into the discussion, Alexander Graham Bell is going to become a little bit less relevant, but that's just because he ceased living in 1922. But before that,
does it, doesn't
it? Exactly. And before that, Charles Sumner Tainter was always looking at Edison's design, and in the back of his head, he said, "I am just going to find out some way that I can improve this." When Thomas Edison released the gold-molded 2-minute cylinder, a little bit later, Charles Sumner Tainter and Alexander Graham Bell developed, the Albany Indestructible 2-minute, which was even more indestructible per se than the gold-molded cylinders. And Edison then started experimenting with celluloid, and released the 4-minute cylinders, and of course Columbia kind of did their own thing with that. So Jack Stanley knows a lot more about this than I do, and I would really like to hear his.
Lots of things, but the interesting thing is with all of these people, and we have to understand the amount of hatred that existed between them all. They really were angry, and a lot of vitriol was going back and forth saying who was stealing from who. And a Tainter was constantly saying that Edison steals every one of my ideas. And of course, Edison said that Bell and Tainter were stealing all of his ideas. But one time he was talking to one of his assistants one time and says, they steal from me, but I know how to steal. And I always thought that was a great line that he used. But the interesting thing is that the phonograph, the tinfoil phonograph, as it was originally developed, presented a lot of problems. It was born prematurely. In some respects, if you think about it, what can you do with it? All you can do is make a recording on the tinfoil, which is not aluminum foil, folks, just so you know. Tinfoil is very different. It's much thicker. It's much more malleable and whatever. But the thing is that you could make a recording, play it back maybe 3 or 4 times, and then it was pretty much gone. And that's all you could do. There was no recordings to play. The only recordings you could play is what you made. And it was like listening to you talk. And, we really like to listen to each other talk, And
Yeah,
so,
big whoop, right?
yeah. And so the thing was, it was fantastic in the beginning. It was a wonderful showpiece. People thought they could confuse it by speaking to it in Latin or Italian or any other language, because since it was an American machine, it certainly wouldn't understand it. That was the mindset at the time. And it was fantastic, wild, crazy, and then the bubble burst. And by the early 1880s, things had kind of slowed down quite a bit. And of course, Edison's focused on incandescent light and lighting New York City.
Exactly. And during that time, when Edison switched his focus, that was when Bell and Tainter decided to focus on how to improve the tinfoil phonograph by using a different material than tinfoil. So in history class, everybody is taught Thomas Edison invented the phonograph. Thomas Edison invented the wax cylinder, which is the first part is true, but the second part is not entirely true. Bell and Tainter are the true inventors of the wax cylinder. And of course, their early designs were very strange. Jack, I'm sure you've seen one in person, but early Bell and Tainter wax cylinders almost look like paper towel rolls.
Yeah, and that wax is called ozocerite.
That's right.
Wrapped around it. And very, very good, but it doesn't age well.
Yes, that's why we are not able to hear many early Bell and Tainter cylinders. And another thing to mention is our dearly beloved Charlie Hummel. He had it was one of, if not the first, Columbia graphophone phonographs, if you want to say, ever made. And it was powered by a foot treadle.
Yeah, it was number 1.
It was number 1. That's right. And right, I was thinking, I knew it was one of the earliest forms.
Like saying it's number 1.
Right, number 1. And, it's really remarkable seeing how different it is than we see the spring motor or the Edison Standard or the Victrola. So if you haven't had a chance to look at it, I'm going to describe it in the best way that I can. Imagine a Singer sewing machine table with a foot treadle and a wheel that goes up to a leather belt, and you have a big Columbia in their early years was known for having big pulleys. Jack, I'm sure you know that. And the mandrel, actually, there is no mandrel, if I'm not mistaken. You have to put the cylinders in 2 little holders. Right. And it was about the length of a paper towel roll, just about, not as wide as one, a little bit thinner. And the recorder reproducer was overhung. So when you would power the treadle, it would actually bring the recorder down into the wax. And as you treadled and treadled, it moved it along. And of course, that was mainly made for dictation, which was really helpful at the time, considering Thomas Edison's phonograph could never serve as a dictation machine. But wax cylinders in their birth were made for dictation.
Yes. Now, of course, one of the issues, first off, is that Bell and Tainter had founded the graphophone company. And Edison was not pleased, to put it mildly. And, they came and they didn't basically go about this in a very good way, but there was an attempt to ask Edison to join them and work together to create a better phonograph. And of course, Edison basically said, no way, I'll improve it in spite of you. And he totally, with his team, and we always have to remember with Edison, Edison's the team and the team of Bell, because Tainter is the real inventor in a lot of stuff with Bell. Bell does some of the inventions with the recording, but a great deal of it's Tainter. Tainter's incredible, brilliant man. And with Edison, I mean, he has this wonderful group of people around him, and they go to solid wax cylinders, which are extremely, extremely finer. They can be shaved and used several times. And they don't age like the Bell Tainter cylinders do, which is basically they flake and you lose everything. But there are wax cylinders going all the way back to 1887, 88.
Which was when the company was founded.
Yeah. And of course, Edison made the big mistake of getting involved with Jesse Lippincott and getting into the dictation business. And you had all the various districts set up, and you had the New York district, the New Jersey district, the District of Columbia district, and they were renegades. They didn't like this whole idea of just dictation, and they started recording music, which did not please the Edison group. And of course, that all fell apart, and Edison had to declare bankruptcy, actually, which was really a mess. And of course, Jesse Lippincott had a fit of apoplexy and died. And interesting thing, Edison always sent money to Mrs. Lippincott to look after her in her later years.
I didn't know that. Huh.
But it's interesting how that all this, they're sitting there in fisticuffs, sitting there saying, our system, and they realized at the Bell and Tainter group that their system needed a lot of help. And so what they did is merge with that renegade group in Washington, D.C. and became the Columbia Graphophone Company. That's where the name comes from. Right. And they eventually moved to Bridgeport. And something that works very good with the Treadles, the factory they take over is an old sewing machine factory. I mean, there was lots of stuff there to use, and treadles were really easy because the spring really hadn't been developed well enough.
Right. And I'm not sure that there was a governor in the foot treadle system.
I don't know, honestly. I can't tell.
Yeah, I don't really remember, but of course, a foot treadle, it's very easy to regulate the speed because you have such a large flywheel. So this was before the governor was even a thought in both of the companies' minds, because Thomas Edison, what?
Governors existed. I mean, steam machines going all the way back to the late 18th century used governors for like steam.
Oh yeah, and steam engines. Yeah, I meant in the phonograph sense, and because Thomas Edison's tinfoil phonograph, the mandrel was really heavy. And if you look at who made the reproduction tinfoil machines? There are a few people. Say it again.
Ray Phillips.
Ray Phillips, that's right. If you look at a Ray Phillips reproduction, which is, it's very spot on.
Incredible stuff.
Yeah. If you try and wind it and, use it, trying to stop it and get it at a consistent speed is very difficult because, the mandrel is very large. But I'm sure many people watching have used a foot treadle Singer, and they understand how much easier it is to control with 2 feet on a treadle. And I myself use a Singer sewing machine. And the governor...
I figured you'd be using one. I figured,
Yes, it's a 1921 Singer. It's right downstairs.
I figured you're pressing your treadle.
Yes, I love it. And actually, I prefer it over the electric ones. And the governor, in the sense of a phonograph, didn't come around until the electric Bell and Tainters, which was the early 1890s, I believe. I think that was the first use of a governor within an electric phonograph, per se.
There are exceptions. I know in England, they developed some tinfoils with butterfly governors.
Oh, like music boxes.
Weight-driven tinfoil machines, which are really amazing when you look at them. I mean, these contraptions.
Yeah, when were those being
Make,
produced? Early 1880s?
huh?
When were those being produced? The early 1880s?
1880s. Yeah, right at the dawn of, 1880, right around there. Because
Wow.
there was the issue, once again, there was the issue of consistency of speed. That was
Right.
something that was recognized right from the beginning. It was a problem.
Right. Right.
Because
That's right.
the thing is this, if you make the recording, let's say, it's not the easiest thing to play it back exactly as you recorded it, because
Exactly. Right.
it's gonna be slightly different.
Right.
And
Which made dictation very difficult.
yeah,
It made dictation very difficult. And if you would have to wind it or foot treadle it exactly as you did in order for the pitch to be consistent. So if you record Shakespeare, it'll be like, oh, it's very hard to think about. And a clever way, when Bell and Tainter introduced the as early as the Type K or the Type N, they had a machine that had a pause and play button per se, where it was a red and black button, where you would, if it was on the red, it would record. It would. There was what do you call that? The gear that meshes into another gear. I forget what that's called.
here,
Yes, and it would connect with that and move the mandrel. But if you were to press the black side of it, it would disengage that, keep the motor running, but stop the mandrel, which was really clever. And it didn't catch on as music started to be the most popular format, or yes, the most popular thing to record on cylinders. That kind of faded away as dictation became less popular.
well, the interesting thing about dictation was there was this grand idea with the National Phonograph Company, with Lippincott and whatever, with all of these various companies, that they wanted to push dictation machines on all these companies and replace stenographers. Now, you have to take a look at the point of view from the stenographer. That was not something that made them happy. And so there was an awful lot of pirating going on with the machines, that they would deliberately mess up the machine so it would screw up. And it was pretty easy to do. Those machines were very delicate and very easy to mess up. And so there was a deliberate attempt by many people to, totally screw them up so they wouldn't lose their job. And that was one of the things that led to the problem, was breakdowns.
That's right. That's exactly. And I'm just thinking about when the graphophone company and Edison, when Edison released the spring motor in 1894, or 1894, yeah. Uh, the Columbia Graphophone Company was fairly quick to switch. They switched in 1895, I believe. And
Yeah.
the Bell and Tainter. What was the Bell and Tainter's version of the spring motor? The model. I think that's the Type K.
I'm not sure of the model number.
Or model letter. There.
It
It's
was
the
it was just the improved.
Yeah, the improved Type K or whatever. Uh,
Yeah,
it
whatever the model was. Yeah, it was basically the reproducer basically hanging down.
Exactly right. It hung down, and people think that, oh, that must mean it runs left to right or something, but no, it goes the standard way, of course, but the reproducer is flipped. But again, that doesn't make much of a sonical acoustical difference. But
Yeah, true.
the spring motor that the Columbia Graphophone Company used in their improved Type K it had 4 springs whereas the spring motor had 3. So it was just another one-up that Bell and Tainter did on Edison. It's just kind of silly.
It was all like, you and back and forth.
Right, exactly.
And, this stuff and whatever. But the thing is, if you think about it, it's fascinating to watch how they both would come into a new style of instrument or record or production method almost at the same times. I mean, you got to remember McDonald at Columbia. He was amazing. One of the best developers of things. I mean, and of course, a lot of the stuff that he developed, he blamed Edison for stealing, and of course, Edison blamed McDonald. Once again, I mean, there's also another point to be made here that's also not talked about too often, and that is, if you want to be a successful company, be in court a lot. Get your names in the paper. Talk about, this bum just stole all my stuff. And the other company will do the same. And usually what will happen is behind the scenes, they will, do an agreement, or sometimes, occasionally, kind of come to an agreement on patents, sometimes even pool them. As we will find later on with Victor and Columbia, they will definitely pool their patents because they couldn't exist
Right.
with the other's patents. I mean,
Exactly.
I'm imagining that, and I have nothing in front of me to tell me this, but I would imagine the same thing. Edison's lawyers and Edison are probably saying, let's make sure we make a big splash with this. It seems to make sense to me because the more you're in the papers, the more the people are going to talk about it.
Absolutely right. We're just passing the 20-minute mark, and I think that we'll further elaborate on this in another episode. And Jack, I'd like to meet with you tomorrow so we can further, elaborate on this, because I wrote an entire 9 to 10 page paper on this for my final music history paper, and there's so much more to talk about, little details that. What's that again?
Yeah, indeed.
Yes, so there's so many more details that I think we can go over tomorrow. So I think that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you for everybody for. Oh, yes, Jack.
Before we go, real quick, I wanted to mention something, and that is music that we listen to. Just very quickly, the music we listen to is in many respects a necropolis of sound. And I think that's an important thing that we need to remember, that the 20th century basically is the first century in which we are entertained by the dead. And the 21st century, that'll even be more so.
Very true.
Because we have collected this necropolis of sound. And it's unique to the 20th century. No other time has ever had anything like this. And that the dead, look at Christmas time, Nat King Cole is singing away, and Frank Sinatra sings, and Al Jolson, and go back to Manio, who died in 1905, and Frank Banta conducting the Metropolitan Orchestra, who died in 1903. They still perform. And that's through the magic and majesty of recorded sound. And I think that's so important. And I wanted to mention that before we say hasta la vista. And we'll continue this later. Okay.
Definitely. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And I'm going to upload this really quick. I got a nice program that just takes our clip and puts it right onto YouTube. So look forward to more episodes. And I'm officially out of school, so I have plenty of time to meet with Jack. So please expect a lot more. I'm really excited about this, and I'm really excited to meet with Jack more over the course of this summer. And we have lots of things to talk about in a short summer. So, yes, very good. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and we will see you in the next one.
Take care.